Okay, this is our life group lesson for September, and there's going to be some discussion in the middle of this, so I'm going to cut the thing off and let you guys do some talking among yourselves. But I have a few things that I kind of want to use to direct your thoughts and aim you at certain places. It is true that every single one of us struggles with sin. We're tempted. Sometimes we give in. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we fight as hard as we know how to overcome temptation, and we fall to the temptation anyway. Sometimes it's like we don't even care. I'll just do what I want. I don't really care. It doesn't matter to me one way or another. I'm just going to do what I feel like doing. Sometimes sin sneaks up on us. We don't really have a choice about whether we've sinned or not. Sometimes we think about temptation as being a very lucid experience where we just sit there and look at it and think, I know what this is and I know what's happening to me. And then we're puzzled because we fall into temptation anyway. But oftentimes temptation grabs us when we're unaware and we're not paying attention and we're in the middle of something that we don't want to be in the middle of, and we haven't even gotten to choose whether or not we will be a part of that. Why do you think, and here's a place where I want you to, after I ask these questions, here's a place where I want you to stop the video and just ask the question and discuss it among yourselves. Why do you think it is so hard to keep from sinning? And along with that, why is sin so powerful? Why is it sometimes easy to say no to sin? Why is it sometimes almost impossible to say no to sin? So stop the video and talk about that for just a couple of minutes. All right, now here's the next thing that I need you to do. I need you to choose someone, and you can do this however you want to. You can read a verse at a time. You can have somebody read the entire passage. But I want you to read Romans chapter 6, verses 1 through 14. Paul talks about two attitudes that we must have in order to defeat the sin that attacks us. I find it hard to get the right word to describe what I think Paul is talking about. Attitude is sort of not really the word that I want there. Maybe mindset, the kind of mindset, the direction we're looking. Maybe worldview would be a better word. But I'm thinking about what Paul, I think, is saying is there is a basic fundamental way of looking at ourselves and looking at the world that determines how we act. It determines how we choose. It determines how we say no to the things that we don't want to do and how we say yes to the things that we want to do and how we decide between those two. What do I really want to do and what am I actually going to do? Paul says there are two basic, very fundamental attitudes that you have to have. Stated negatively, he says we have to know that we have died to sin. And then we have to live by that reality. Paul calls that counting yourself dead to sin. Then stated positively, we must consider ourselves alive to God. So, first, we have died to sin. Paul says, and pay attention to what he's saying here in Romans 6, Paul says we are dead to sin. He is not saying that we ought to be dead to sin. He is not saying that we potentially could be dead to sin. He says we are already dead to sin. We have been baptized into Christ. So we have both spiritually and in our own mindset, the way we think, we have participated in the death of Jesus on the cross. Now, spiritually, I say, because that is what baptism does. We don't notice it, we don't see it, we don't feel it. It is just something that takes place in that spiritual realm that's beyond our senses. When we are baptized into Christ, we die with Christ, and therefore, Paul says, we are dead to sin. Now, in our minds, in our mindset, I think Paul is talking to us about why was it that you were baptized in the first place? Why did you become a Christian in the first place? Well, we were tired of sin, and we were tired of sin running and ruining our lives. We were longing for a better life. We wanted a life free of guilt. We wanted a life free of pain and all the negatives that sin brings us. So we learned about Jesus, and we heard that he died so that we could be forgiven of sin. And that's what we wanted. We wanted to have the harmful, hurtful effects of sin just wiped out of our lives. And so we were baptized into Christ, and our sins, we believed, were forgiven. So Paul's implied question is, if you wanted to be rid of sin that badly, why do you so easily give in when sin tempts you? Here's a situation I want you to think about. Two women get into a vicious argument, really hateful argument, and it gets so violent that one of them finally turns to the other and says, "You are dead to me." What does she mean? Now, if she sticks to what she says, if she sticks to what she has said to this other woman, what is that going to look like? So stop the video right here and talk about, what does this woman mean when she says, "You are dead to me," and what is that going to look like if she actually carries that threat, that curse out? Now, in Romans chapter 6 and verse 11, Paul says that we should consider ourselves dead to sin. Now, thinking about that little scenario that you just talked about, what similarities do you see between being dead to sin and the woman being dead to me? And to turn that around, what does being alive to sin look like in someone's life? So here's the question again I want you to discuss, or the two questions I want you to discuss. What similarities do you see between this idea of being dead to sin and this woman saying to the other, "You're dead to me"? And then what does being alive to sin look like in a person's life? All right, look down at verse 13 where Paul says, "Do not offer any part of yourself to sin as an instrument of wickedness." I want you to discuss this particular question, or these set of questions really, I guess. What does offering yourself to sin look like? Do you think that we do that intentionally? If not, then why do we do it? If we don't do it intentionally, then why do we do it? And what might be some helpful strategies for not offering ourselves to sin? I'm going to put those on the screen and just kind of leave them there. So your leader may want to turn this off here in just a moment. But here are these questions again. What does offering yourself to sin look like? Do you think that we do that intentionally? If we don't do it intentionally, then why do we do it? And what might be some helpful strategies for not offering ourselves to sin? Now, just so you know, the word that's translated instrument in verse 13 in the NIV can also be translated weapon. So that, you have Paul saying, don't offer any part of yourself to sin as a weapon of wickedness. I find that to be a compelling translation. I mean, it really puts a different spin on this idea of offering yourself to sin, because now, rather than just becoming an instrument, sin uses you to accomplish what it's trying to do. Now you become a weapon, and sin is turning you to its destructive and harmful powers. Now, we have not only died to sin, but we have become alive to God through Jesus Christ. Our baptism, excuse me, I got to turn the page here. Our baptism was not only about death, it was also about a new kind of life. We shared in the resurrection of Jesus, and you can't get much more new than that, going from dead and then being alive again. Now, I think what Paul is saying to us is we didn't just want to be free of sin and then, just sit around with our hands in our pockets like lumps doing absolutely nothing. What we wanted was to be free of sin so that we could live a whole different kind of life. We wanted to be happy. We wanted to be free. We wanted to be full of goodness, and we wanted to enjoy our lives in a completely guilt-free way. And we wanted to be useful in the world. Paul calls that living a new life. Now note that the adjective new in new life does not mean something new like we think of when we get a new car. We didn't have a car and now we have one. It's a new car. It didn't exist and it doesn't have any miles on it. It is brand new. It is a new car. That's really not what Paul is saying with that word. The word Paul uses means something like different from the old. You had something old, but now you have something completely different. It's sort of like someone saying, I used to ride a horse, and then I bought a Ferrari, and now I travel in an entirely new way. So, here we are. We were baptized. We were hoping to be raised from the dead, just like Jesus was, so that we could have an entirely different way of living than we did before, getting rid of those old bodies that were rotted by sin and getting new bodies that were perfect for living the sinless life that God is going to bring about. So, the implied question that Paul is asking is, if you came to Jesus and you were baptized so that you could live a new kind of life, why are you settling for living the way you did before, in that old life, that old existence? So again, back to verse 13, which says, do not offer any part of yourself to sin as an instrument of wickedness. We've talked about that. But rather offer yourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and offer every part of yourself as an instrument of righteousness. First, Paul talks about a new way of thinking about ourselves, a new mindset, a new attitude, a new worldview. We are alive to God. Here's another scenario. Think about this for a minute. It's kind of a little bit strange, but not too bad. You've wished for a new bicycle for a long time. You have begged your parents. You go by the store where the bicycle is there in the window, and you've just drooled over new bicycles. That's all you can think about. That's all you can dream about. You want a new bicycle. And you wake up on Christmas morning and you go into the living room, and there standing beside the Christmas tree is a brand new bicycle. Now, here's what I want you to talk about. How does it feel? What does that feel like? And then secondly, what are you going to do with this new bicycle? Now, here's the second thing that I want you to discuss that comes out of that. How might this receiving a new bicycle, how does it feel? What are you going to do with it? How might this be similar to the feelings and actions that come with being alive to God? And then the second question that I want you to talk about is, what changes when you think of yourself as being dead to sin and alive to God? Okay, talk about that for just a moment. Okay, the first thing we talked about was a new way of thinking about ourselves. We're alive to God. The second thing is that we offer ourselves to Him as instruments of righteousness. So, again, after just that little short statement, I want you to turn the video off and discuss these questions. What does offering yourself to God look like? Secondly, what might we do to offer ourselves to God? What actions are we going to take to offer ourselves to God? What does that look like? Now, again, I want to go back and remind you that the word instrument can be translated weapon. Instead of destroying people by offering ourselves as weapons of sin, we are now destroying sin. We are a weapon of righteousness, a weapon of God to destroy sin and the effects of sin. Now, let me ask you this. It seems disconnected, but I think when we start offering ourselves to God, we learn to love people in a new way. That's really what Romans is all about. Paul has these two groups in the church that are fighting, and he's trying to get them together and realize that they're all a part of one big body in Christ Jesus, and they need to love one another. So my question is, how would loving other people destroy the effects and even the practice of sin? All right? Now, finally, and your leader may not even want to play this part of the video, but I would like for you to end this little session by praying for each other. Number one, I want you to pray about two specific things. Number one, I want you to give thanks that we are dead to sin. So whoever leads the prayer, or however you decide to pray, I mean, you can break up into men and women groups and pray for each other. You can turn to the person next to you and pray for that person. However you guys want to do this prayer. But whatever you do, whoever is leading prayer, I want you to, number one, give thanks to give thanks to God that we are dead to sin. And number two, pray for hearts that are absolutely certain that we are alive to God.